Warning, warning, this podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we tag into the wrestling world of Norwich, England, and then later on Florida, with Fighting with My Family.
Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
What?
That's The Rock.
Oh,
one of his catchphrases.
That's right. Yeah,
it's in the film.
Yes, when he gets very, very loud, which is apparently one of the things that we'll get into it. Yes, this episode we're doing Fighting with My Family, the 2019. I guess you can call it like dramedy, like sports drama comedy. I didn't think it was particularly funny per se, but it had its moments.
I mean, the funniness came from basically Nick Frost and Lena Headey.
Yeah, that's right. Those two seem to be having a lot of fun more than on anything.
Yes.
Just combining Lena Headey and Nick Frost together as a pair, I think, is kind of fun. But yeah.
I like that. Inspired.
Yeah, it's an inspired choice. And really good casting, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get into it. This is Fighting with My Family, a 2019 British film about Paige, the wrestler. I know nothing about wrestling, so Evan's going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting for this episode. Though I did see the documentary, the short Channel 4 documentary called The Wrestlers Fighting with My Family that this film is based on. So at least I can contribute in that respect. So, Ev, what did you think of Fighting with My Family?
As a film fan, I enjoyed it quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a nice little heartwarming-ish almost family sort of film. I mean, if your family is a bit older than kids.
Yeah, sure.
But like just something you could sort of sit with
Oh,
your partner or something.
It definitely has a big, significant, familiar aspect. Not only in the movie, but also I think the people who would enjoy this movie too.
Yes,
so, yeah,
absolutely. It's called Fighting with My Family.
Yeah,
It's
checks
kind of
out.
an implied.
Yeah, and the family was the whole thing that The Rock got interested in the first place. So yeah,
Mainly because he's from a wrestling family as well. So
yep.
he's sort of got that familiar bond as well, so I can see why he'd jump in on that. But yeah, so as a film fan, loved it. As a wrestling fan, thought it was good, although my mind was sticking to a lot of things they seemingly got, just had to get wrong just for the sake of, set and design and stuff and budget and things.
What do you mean exactly? Like based on the way they present the wrestling, or?
The wrestling itself was pretty damn accurate.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's what to expect when you've got someone like The Rock trying to be the producer of it all.
Sure, checks out.
And he's going to bring in... they brought in actual, really good wrestlers to do a lot of the things. Like the person who played AJ Lee in the final few scenes, that's Zelina Vega. That's her wrestling ring name at the moment. I think her actual name is Trinidad.
You're throwing wrestling names at me. I know nothing here.
I know. I was just trying to think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she's now with the WWE. She's pretty damn good. And the stunts not performed by Florence for the wrestling of Paige were done by Tessa Blanchard, who is right now one of the biggest stars in the independent scene.
Oh, okay, sure. So there is a lot of
the wrestling itself,
pedigree behind the scenes. Sure. It
Yeah,
makes sense considering The Rock produced the movie. Yeah.
Yes, it's more just the way that they sort of played with time. I couldn't tell if they were going for set in the time that it was actually set, or if it's like, oh, we've adapted it now to a more modernish sort of setting for a few years, because a lot of things change with that, but then the way things planned out, it was kind of hard to pick.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, and this is, I guess, knowing the actual timeline of filming Paige, but also just wrestling and things like that. Sure, because I didn't necessarily notice anything like that, but obviously, considering I'm not at all keyed in, understandable. Which goes back to the usual thing we talk about is, obviously you bring your own subjective expectations to every film, so... Yeah, sure. No, interesting. Cool. as a complete wrestling novice, like I know the extent of my knowledge of wrestling basically comes from weird anecdotes that Evers told me in the past and watching this movie in the documentary. So I think the film is quite good as well. Like I think it's generally well made. It is very traditional sports film in some respects, but I think it manages to get past those tropes and cliches in some respects with still like really good performances and direction and just being a generally entertaining movie as well. So I can't really speak to the wrestling side of it per se. Like honestly, you could take this general premise of the movie and completely swap out wrestling for any other sport, and it would have no impact on me in any way, shape, or form. Like I don't know, she could have been training for a golf tournament, as far as I care or concerned. But that general narrative structure there and the idea of the family being so dedicated to it and all that, I think is really good. And I think the casting is all that is amazing. For the most part, like I think everyone is generally bang on. We've already talked about Nick Frost and Lena Headey. The movie started and Florence Pugh showed up. I'm like, holy shit, is that Florence Pugh? So this is like 2019 was like a massive breakout year for Florence Pugh. Like everyone went from basically not knowing who she was to her being a household name in things like Midsommar and Little Women, and she's going to be playing in Black Widow in 2020 as well. So like she's basically bursting on the scene in a big way, and rightfully so, because I think she's really, really good, and I think really properly cast in this movie. So, as someone who is familiar with Paige, the actual wrestler, did you have any particular issues with how she was cast, or?
No, not at all. I think she had the lockdown pat. She had the performance. Sometimes it felt like almost underacting from Florence in the sense that because Paige is such like a over the top sort of
like such a
character and
big
persona that
yeah.
Florence playing her as an actual human felt weird.
She was too nuanced.
Yes.
Too subtle. That's kind of
But
funny.
aside from those, I think she did a really good job with this, and I can very much make the line between Paige and Florence.
Sure. Yeah, fantastic. I think this movie is generally fun. It kind of struck me similar to Eddie the Eagle in some respects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It is obviously based on a true story. It is a fairly straightforward sports biopic story, but is still like, I mean, there is a reason that these kind of narratives keep showing up, right? Like there's something inherently endearing about kind of not only the underdog story, but also someone who really dedicates themselves to something. And just like the classic kind of trials and tribulations of just wanting to be the best or succeeding in any particular field. And I think this movie tapped into that in a really good way. And in wrestling, which is not something that I've ever particularly considered before. So, great stuff. Did we want to talk briefly about the documentary as well?
Yes, given that is technically the source material.
I mean, that and obviously a combination of real life.
life, yes.
In that the film actually goes further than the documentary. Because the documentary was made in 2012. It was a Channel 4 documentary, which is a channel in the UK, directed by Max Fisher. Goes for about 45 minutes. You can actually find it online. I'd probably recommend giving it a look because I found it quite interesting too. And it was filmed and put together in 2012. And obviously a lot of things happened after 2012, which are integrated into the movie. But that is like generally like that's where it gets the title from. Like the original documentary is called The Wrestlers Fighting with My Family. Dwayne Johnson or The Rock, whatever. Does he still want people to call him The Rock these days? I don't know. I can't keep
goes
up.
by either.
Okay, sure. Dwayne The Rock Johnson has talked about the fact that he was shooting a film in the UK at like 3 a.m. and saw this playing on TV. And basically was really connected with it in a way because of that familiar aspect around the wrestling. And then a couple of years later, he basically told Paige that, hey, I want to make a movie about this. And went from there, which I think is kind of cool and kind of interesting. So I guess like not only is the documentary like kind of the source material, but it also, the fact that it was seen by the right person essentially inspired the fact that it was turned into a feature-length film as well. So it's kind of neat. What did you think of the documentary itself?
So the documentary quite interesting. I mean, nothing like to write home about, but for what it was, a nice little TV doco.
It's a really good human interest story, I think.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Found it quite interesting. It plays a different narrative to kind of what happened in the film, mainly because it's a lot shorter, condensed. It focuses basically from a bit early on to like just before the contract signing to her first televised match in FCW.
Yep.
Whereas the film goes way past FCW all the way to her main roster debut.
That was in 2014, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yep. So a couple of years after the documentary was filmed. Yeah.
Yeah. 2014, 2015, and she'd been wrestling at NXT and FCW for about 3 years.
Okay, sure. Yeah, interesting.
So yes, from that perspective, and because it also felt a bit more true, because it was real life, it felt more true to actual the wrestling independent scene. You got to see some of the other stuff beyond the WWE sort of big brand, because for any wrestling fans, they know that the WWE is basically the Disney of the pro wrestling world.
Sure. Okay. In that it just dominates everything. Like that
it dominates everything.
Yep.
It has its own history that it tends to try and rewrite quite a bit.
Oh, yep. That sounds like Disney.
Yeah. It tries very much to have legal control over everything. That's why a lot of wrestlers nowadays have wrestling names, not because of the fact that they were like trying to distinct character from actor and the idea of kayfabe, but more because the WWE want to have trademark and copyrights over their names.
Right, okay. Which they obviously can't do if someone's using their real persona, basically. Yeah, sure. Wow, okay. That's very interesting and a little bit dicey.
Yeah, they're an interesting company, to say the least.
Sure. And the documentary in this movie especially are not critical of it at all. I heard...
No, but at least they acknowledge that the Beyond the Independent scene, Paige and her mother were doing other stuff with other independent scenes, and kind of roughly mentioned some of the other, like, Evolve Pro Wrestling and Shimmer, like, very subtly, I guess.
Sure. Like, basically saying the WWE isn't the only thing. Yeah. I don't know, it's interesting, because I remember reading on one review of the movie that it kind of approached WWE as, like, a fantasy machine. Like, it was kind of, like, very much buying into the if you get signed by the WWE, like, you'll become a superstar, like, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, which is definitely not the case.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scene, but it is kind of, I don't know, it kind of smooths the edges of the process, I guess, in some respects, and says, like, well, if Paige can do it, then you can do it too, little Jimmy. Yeah, which I don't know is an accurate narrative, but it is definitely the narrative that something like the WWE would want to push.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think oh, sorry, what were we going to say?
I was going to say, and also just on top of that, the documentary also made it pretty clear as to the actual reasons why, like, her brother didn't get in, and the fact that WWE just really has a hard-on for 6'5", super jacked wrestlers, even if they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yep. It's a very specific body type that they go towards.
Yes.
So, yep.
Despite the protests from a lot of the hardcore fans.
Really? Okay, interesting.
Oh yeah, some of the biggest wrestling names that the fans have gotten behind have been like the smaller, scrawnier guys that didn't fit the classic WWE mold.
Yeah.
People like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, most recently. Do not fit the mold at all.
Interesting.
And despite the WWE managed to get over.
Yeah, sure. Very, very interesting. I mean, they definitely... I actually kind of even feel in the documentary, especially considering halfway through, Paige goes to Florida, or like, and then she's out of the picture for the family for the most part, that it almost feels like her brother essentially becomes the lead focus, or like the person of interest for the documentary at that point, which the movie doesn't necessarily do. Like, he's still very much a supporting character, but he still has a continued arc while Paige is still off doing her own thing, basically, essentially. But I do think the documentary is very interesting in that respect, in that it is ultimately focused on the family unit, which the film does as well, but it is also a lot of, like, Paige on the other side of the world, just training on her own, essentially. Like, it's a slightly different setup, I guess, in that respect. But
well, I guess because that's more sort of accurate to real life in the sense, especially in such a short time frame.
Yeah, of course. So I think the general ideas of what the documentary touches on, which is just like the family unit behind the wrestling, the fact that it is a family affair, the fact that Paige only started wrestling. I don't actually remember her real name. I just keep referring to her as
Saraya.
Saraya, that's
Saraya
right.
Knight.
Yep. The fact that she was not even interested in wrestling initially and then got into it after her dad basically forced her to help out one night, essentially, which is, that is accurate and true to life. That is in the documentary as well. The film actually takes, like, quotes directly from the documentary time and time again, Like the stuff like wrestling saved me, or like wrestling is our religion and things like that. Like, especially when it comes to the two parents, like is almost word for word sometimes, which I kind of appreciate, which definitely feels like that same ethos is very much embedded in the script in the way that it was in the original doco. So
you can definitely see, as in the film, up until when Paige leaves for Florida, they've basically adapted fully the documentary. Kind of in a way.
Absolutely.
Aside from a few bits here and there, obviously.
Yeah, sure. The general structure of what is going on is the same, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's basically or as close as you get to a straight adaptation for this movie.
Yep.
Is in that first act.
Yeah, of course. And then once she is accepted by the WWE and Vince Vaughn comes into the picture, which I was very surprised to see him in this movie as well, in all honesty. I'll have to check my notes, but I'm pretty sure there's a point that I just say, what on earth is Vince Vaughn doing here? I mean, like, of all the people who I would expect to cast in a movie about wrestling, like, he was not very high up that list, which I guess is kind of the point. I actually really liked him in the movie in the end.
Oh, yeah, I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
And I could totally see sort of, even though his character was completely fictional, some of the aspects that he took from actual, like, that were taken from actual trainers at that time.
Sure, he was kind of a conglomeration of a lot of different people.
Yeah.
Like, Paige had, 4 or 5 different trainers?
Oh, yeah, and all of them sort of took on different sort of aspects as well. So, in the movie, it shows Vince Vaughn sort of taking control over the entire sort of aspect of the performance center, where in true life, a lot of trainers had a lot of different aspects. Like the promo classes were run by Dusty Rhodes. The in-ring work was usually done by Bill DeMott and later Matt Bloom. And so that kind of stuff sort of plays in, and it's all sort of like just for the sake of necessity and time, I guess they just went, and one person.
Yeah, put it all together. Like, streamline it, essentially. Like, I think the general ethos of what happens over in the US, like when she gets there and she's struggling trying to fit in, she did actually like fake tan herself and like blonde her hair, bleach her hair.
Yep.
I believe that was correct as far as I'm aware. So
from what I could hear, again, I don't know the full actual story.
Sure, this is the difficult thing when talking about a true story, obviously. Yeah.
But from what I've heard, she did that for her first tryout that she didn't get into.
Right.
And then came back with a like more natural goth-like look.
Sure.
And that's when they took her on.
Sure. Okay, interesting. So they kind of transposed that moment that actually happened in real life, but to a later point.
Yes.
So, yeah. Which makes sense, I think, considering the narrative arc of the movie. That is when she's essentially having that crisis of conscience.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of the stuff, I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the documentary, where the first act is fairly faithful for the most part, and then the moment she goes to the US and everything, it basically gets beyond the documentary, is when it gets a little bit more fictional and dramatized and things like that. Like, I would assume, like, I don't know how much of that was accurate, but I would assume that she would have had, like, you know, questions of missing her family and things like that, that whole crisis of conscience, whether she wanted to go back and all that. But it is, like, very much dramatized and, like, put into a specific template.
Yeah, well, I think Paige is quoted as saying the movie is, like, 99% accurate to how it felt.
Yep. Funnily enough, the one point which she said was not accurate was The Rock screaming at her before her first tryout, which I found quite funny.
Yep.
Yeah, I knew The Rock was vaguely involved with production. I did not know he was in the movie until that scene when he showed up. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, he's just putting himself in here as like a magic wrestling fairy, basically, because he was not there in real life, right? Like, that whole interaction is fabricated, surely.
That first one?
The second one I know is correct.
Yes.
Though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the second time, obviously, I think I have a point in my notes when I literally said, like, The Rock is Paige's magic fairy that shows up at key points to give advice and support.
Which is kind of funny, considering that a lot of the inception for this, aside from The Rock watching that documentary, was the relationship between The Rock and Steve Merchant, which came about thanks to the Tooth Fairy.
I know. Of all the weird-ass connections, I mean, the world was a strange place sometimes.
Well, Steve Merchant and Dwayne Johnson met on the set of
the Tooth Fairy.
Fairy, and so when Dwayne needed a British writer to take the reins, he went, "Yep, I know that guy.
Yep,
he's cool.
That
Give
works
him
out.
it."
And Stephen Merchant is taller than The Rock, which is scary. Once again, this is a weird world we live in. Stephen Merchant is great. We haven't really talked about Stephen Merchant to this point, actually.
So he's
He
the
directed and wrote the movie.
Yeah.
I think did he
And he's in
co-wrote
it.
or yes, has a supporting role as the father of Zach's girlfriend basically.
Yes.
Yep. When he asked like all those weird questions about wrestling at the beginning, which is very clearly for audience members who knew nothing about wrestling, like me, so which is kind of appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah, so the Stephen Merchant has like a long history on. You could probably speak to this more actually, but like British TV and The Office
Yeah.
and things like that.
So
Yeah.
he's mainly known for his sort of works with Ricky Gervais and Carl Plinkton. The sort of three of them did a lot together with like The Office and Extras and that weird docu-series that they did
Sure.
where they sent Carl Plinkton to all these places they didn't want to go to.
Oh, I think I've heard of that actually. You might have told me
yeah.
about it.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Steve Merchant kind of is a big deal, especially in Britain. Known for
I
his
don't want to
comedy
hype
writing.
things up, but I'm kind of a big deal.
But yeah, he's known for his comedy sort of wrestling, and also, as far as I can tell, knew nothing about wrestling before taking on this film.
That's what I kind of wondered, in all honesty. Especially the way the movie was put together, and it had so many moments when it was basically like explaining wrestling to the audience, like that stuff at the beginning, that it's not fake, it's scripted. Even The Rock saying was like, "Oh, I'm playing myself out there, but
Yeah.
like a louder, more bombacious version of myself." Like all of that seemed to be thrown in there from the perspective of someone who was not incredibly familiar with wrestling. So, which I think probably made the movie more enjoyable for me at the very least, because I mean it didn't mean that I didn't have to have that background. I don't know how you feel about that though.
I mean, as a wrestling fan, I've heard this all before.
Yeah, sure.
I know all about the fact, and the whole "it's fake, right" kind of thing is. I've heard that argument from all different cases that it just ties.
Yeah.
But like, I can, while watching it, I knew why it was there, and I could appreciate that it was there and trying to actually come across as accurate as possible.
Sure. Yeah,
So I was
absolutely. So,
happy with it.
yeah.
If it gets more people into wrestling, I'm down with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's ultimately what it does in some respects. So I think having someone who isn't even necessarily in wrestling in some respects and can focus more on the story and the general arc, which people can connect with, I think probably kind of helped the movie. Because Stephen Merchant is ultimately like a talented guy with like a long history. So not only a great director and writer as well, but like a good actor too, honestly. He's really, really great in Logan, which ironically enough was I think the first time I ever knew about him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's the difficult thing with, like, writers behind the scenes and things like that, but I never really watched the original Office or anything like that, so I kind of missed all of his roles until, like, who on earth is this guy playing this really cool character in Logan? And everyone's talking about, like, it's just someone I should know, and then surprise, surprise, he's, but I mean, this is the thing, like, this, especially Logan and this is, like, kind of really far off his usual base, and the fact that I think he kind of excels in different areas, I think is super impressive, so... Yeah, no, I think he's really good. And I think he was like, obviously he was the only choice for The Rock, and that he was the only British person he knew.
I don't know about only British person he knew, but
Sure. Yeah, but like the
a
person...
writer director that he could
Yes,
attune to.
the person he called up at the very least. I think he was a fairly good choice. I just think he's a talented guy, and so I think bringing more of a story person on as opposed to a wrestling person, I think was a smart bet.
Yeah.
So,
I completely agree with that. And not to say that, even though Steve Merchant himself says he knows nothing about wrestling, wrestling in Britain is kind of a big deal.
I'm going to say it again. Not to hype me up, but I'm kind of a big deal. Stephen Merchant and wrestling, the two big deals of Britain.
Yeah. But yeah, no, because Britain has quite a like long history with independent wrestling, and it's got its own history behind it. So even if you aren't a wrestling fan, you sort of know about it because it was just around. It was like it showed wrestling on free-to-air TV for free-to-air as in the fact that Britain pays for a license, but then
Sure.
plays everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, effectively the regular television, it was playing it and giving it the like time it deserves and things.
Which has obviously never happened in Australia, as far as I'm aware. So
it doesn't even really happen in America, especially nowadays, because it's all very much either online streaming or it's on one of the cable networks.
Sure, of course. Yeah, interesting. So it's more of a cultural aspect, I guess, in the UK as compared to other places.
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool.
So yeah, that was bound to have influenced some of the work on that, which is why I'm very glad that it filmed itself in Norwich, literally where it came from, and surrounding areas, because they could tap into the actual like culture and wrestling knowledge of the locals.
Yeah, yeah.
And the fact that they had the family themselves in it. At least the ones that didn't get their scenes cut.
Well, yes. Sure, it's true. But I mean, like, the brother shows up at the very least and things like that, so...
And you can see in the deleted scenes, they've got the mother and the father have their little cameo.
Have their little moment, which is fun.
Yes.
So, yep.
But more importantly, it's the fact that they were there to be able to actually, like, give notes and
Yeah, exactly.
probably show how British wrestling operates in Britain.
Yeah. Like, the movie, especially, I think it's a really good point that you say that it filmed in Norwich and surrounding areas, that the movie was very much shot and designed from, like, a grand-up kind of local-based thing. Because this is not technically, like, a big Hollywood production or anything like this.
No.
Like, this is comparatively a genuinely quite small movie. And I think it kind of pays off in that respect, honestly. So,
It's weird, because it was basically this... aside from the fact that The Rock was the one that was
Aside
producing
from the fact that The Rock is producing this small indie movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't even really... They weren't expecting it to take off hugely. There was the first leap where they managed to get WWE's permission and help to film some of the scenes.
Yeah, nice.
Because that's got to do a lot with why it's sort of anachronistic, because they basically just had to film after Raw had the WWE's weekly show had wrapped up filming for the night, and they just went, guys, okay, the crowd, can you just hang on there a bit while we do some filming for this movie that The Rock is doing.
Yeah, sure.
So that's why a lot of it is all very sort of set in weird modern times, because they basically had access to the modern WWE.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah, sure. Oh, it's very cool. Side note, I did my semester abroad in Norwich, and I recognized a lot of the areas in this movie.
Oh.
Yeah, and in the documentary. There was one point when she was walking along, like, just walking a dog, and she's having the conversation at the same time. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was the track in front of the place I stayed in, which was kind of neat. But yeah, I appreciated seeing that in the film, in all honesty. So I think the fact that this was envisioned initially as The Rock wanting to make this movie, and, like, obviously clearly, like, embedded in the WWE and wrestling and the local area and things like that, I think ultimately really pays off. Yeah, I think, and you can kind of feel that in the movie itself. So yeah, no, awesome, good stuff. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding the film, or like from what I can tell, the third act, like the kind of when she wins, is it the Diva belt or the women's belt? Or...
oh god, the Divas Championship.
Yeah, that's right. Which have changed the women's championship now, haven't they? Or...
Oh yeah, it did not last long, and it's really upsetting that Paige, despite how great she is, was around the time that the Divas belt was out.
Okay.
But yeah, it basically came in 2008, I think, and left in about, when was it? I want to say around 2017.
Oh, okay. So still around for a few years after Paige.
Oh, yeah. Paige is still known as the youngest Divas champion now at this point.
Yeah, cool.
So because that's gone, that's probably going to stay.
Cool. Well, I mean, you take away the competition and no one else can do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And, man, did the hardcore wrestling fans hate that belt.
Oh, really? Why is that exactly?
Okay, so originally there was the women's championship that had a long and luxurious history. It come out from the early territorial days and managed to hang around. It sort of went away, but always sort of came back. It's held by some true legends like Trish Stratus and Lita Alundra Blaze, all these other like Hall of Fame level people. And then when they did one of the brand splits that they did in WWE, so a brand split in WWE is basically they had two shows going and they went, all right, half of the roster will be on this one and half of the roster will be on that one.
Right.
Okay. And when doing that, they decided, each show needs their own championships. So they created the Divas Championship as sort of like a secondary belt to the Women's Championship, which was on Raw. SmackDown had their Divas Championship.
Right, sure. So it was like an ongoing parallel tournament, basically.
Yeah,
in some respects.
sort of
yeah, sure.
things. And then when that first draft sort of dissolved, they decided to combine the two titles together. But instead of going with the women's one, they went with the Divas god awful butterfly belt, and kind of ruined a lot of the history of the women's championship.
Right. Okay.
Until eventually they just went, you know what? We're going with this Divas Revolution trademark copyright thing going in WWE. we need to get rid of the butterfly belt, and so they introduced the new WWE Women's Championship, but treated it as it's its own new thing.
Sure.
So,
Okay. Interesting. Right.
yeah, history lesson.
Yeah, good to know. So that is a long preamble up until the point that Paige did actually win the Divas belt.
Yes.
In 2014, correct? So
Yes,
yeah.
although it's anachronistic in the fact that they showed clips, they showed like her being a young'un holding like the cardboard Divas Championship when that would not have been the case.
Yeah, sure. Okay. That timeline just doesn't really work.
No.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Outside of that, like, are you familiar at all with the event when she won it? Because from what I understand, like, obviously she was well known at this point as opposed to being an unknown.
Yes.
Which is what they kind of set up in the film.
Yeah, so in real life, generally, the actual moments was pretty similar. Although, yes, by that point, Paige was already pretty well known to a lot of the wrestling fans because she'd spent her time in NXT, which was their sort of developmental brand,
Sure.
which was also televised, and she was the first NXT Women's Champion, so that sort of took her up. So people knew her and were chanting her name as soon as she came out on that first night. She wasn't frozen. From what I can remember watching it, she was pretty damn confident.
Well, I'd assume, considering she had a couple of years under her belt at that
Yes.
point, it's very, very different from being just an immediate newcomer. So,
And so that was her thing. She was talking to AJ Lee. That was accurate. AJ Lee putting her title on the line. That was accurate. There was a third person, technically, in that scenario, in Tamina, who was AJ Lee's bodyguard. For some reason, Tamina Snuka just wasn't there. I don't know why.
sure. Okay. Right.
But I guess probably just unnecessary. And Paige did win the Divas belt
Sure.
the day after WrestleMania.
Okay, so the general ethos of the event is the same, but they just
Yeah.
the film very much feels like it tries to truncate everything into a much more streamlined like timeline and narrative and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think
And they
especially
could have the big speech at the end, which also did not happen.
yeah, exactly. So the big speech in the ring freeze, I think especially like are obviously fictional moments, but it fits the kind of narrative adjustment that the movie is trying to do at the very least. So once again, I think like I don't think the movie is ever intentionally like misleading or things like that. It is mostly, which happens a lot with like we haven't done many true story films, but one of the normal things that happens is like real life is messy and sometimes it doesn't always fit into a neat cohesive narrative and things like that. And what adaptations do in that respect is just streamline it and hone it down and then cut off the fat and then turn it into a more digestible narrative in a way that is very often similar to the way that the narrative played out in real life, but just a much more straightforward and easy to comprehend version of it. And I think the third act is very much indicative of that. So yeah, cool. Great. All right, is there anything else you want to touch on regarding the film and the documentary, or shall we move into Do It Differently?
Up to you, unless there's anything you want to know about the wrestling world. I think I've covered most of what I want to say.
I think I'm all good for the most part. What's his name? I'm just going through my notes. It was mostly just noting all of the lines that were in the film that were straight from the documentary. Even the bit about selling tons of merchandise and things like that, like the business side, I thought was quite funny.
Ooh, I know something I want to touch on.
Oh yeah, sure.
So just lastly, before we go into Do It Differently, I do want to point out again, we talked about it earlier, but how great Lena Headey was in this.
Oh yeah. We mentioned Nick Frost and Lena Headey at the top, but yeah.
But no, her performance was absolutely fantastic. I think it was spot on to the real Sweet Soraya.
Yeah, sure.
It was the mother, but that's her ring name. Her actual name, I think, is Julia.
Yeah. She was really funny as well, actually. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just that dinner scene that they have where she's like, talks about, oh, you should see his cock. Oh, sorry. Penis. Just the way that was done was just so great.
Yeah. Because I'd never seen Lena Headey in anything comedic as well, honestly.
Yeah,
so.
no, neither.
I mean, it's almost entirely just Game of Thrones. And she's great in Game of Thrones, but this was like a different side that I really appreciated. Whereas Nick Frost is like kind of doing his classic Nick Frost thing, but it's still, he's really
Nick
good.
Frost is good, but this was, compared to his other work, this was nothing to sort of distinguish itself.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think the cast in general is really good. Like, I was surprised when Vince Vaughn showed up, but I actually thought he was a really great addition.
Yeah.
Florence Pugh, I've already touched on, is quite fantastic. The actor who plays the brother, whose name currently escapes me, I thought kind of ironically in some respects, they cast someone who would be more likely to be put into the WWE while still being that, like, kind of, you know what I mean, though. It's
Yeah. Jack Loudon.
Yes.
Who is the guy who plays Zodiac.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of feel he sort of... Even then, though, I can also see him, like, just missing out.
Yep.
Because he sort of didn't have anything... He was not an extreme. He was, like... He's the perfect sort of actor Hollywood look, but for WWE, they go for the extremes in either direction. So I can actually kind of see him, like... just sticking around the developmentals for a while.
Yeah, sure. Like that seemed to fit relatively well, but while still being very much a Hollywoodized version of the brother.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. But no, I thought he was really good too. I kind of appreciate that the movie, even after Paige moves to the US, that he still has a lot to do. Like he's still very much a major supporting character and like has like kind of a parallel arc to Paige that I thought was quite good. The actor himself, like he was in Dunkirk as well, which is where I first saw him, and he's fantastic in that. So I'd really like to see him in more stuff. So yeah, once again, I think the cast is really good. Cool. All right, shall we move into Do It Differently?
Sure.
Yep.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
All the
Ding,
way.
ding, ding.
Okay. What? Ding, ding, ding?
Ring bell.
Yeah, of course. This is how out of touch.
Start.
This is how out of touch I'm with wrestling. I assumed it was like part of a song or something.
No,
Yep.
that's not even just a purely wrestling thing. Other sports have that.
Yeah, well, okay. This shows how much of a non-sport person I am. Maths. I get most of my information from movies, all right? So, like,
Okay.
I can tell you all the hallmarks of, like, a classic underdog sports biopic, but I would not be able to tell you how, like, an actual thing of wrestling goes. I can go first this episode if you want. I mean, my Do
sure.
It Differently is... This is one of those films which was... Well, I don't think it's necessarily amazing. I think it's all really quite solid, and there's actually not a lot I would directly change. So for Do It Differently, I just want to completely do it differently and kind of go for a much more lighthearted, comedic British film, not following any of the main characters in the film itself, but following one of the other members of the Knight family. There was reference in the documentary that doesn't show up in the film.
The beautician.
No, the dentist.
Yeah, the same person.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
sure. Yeah, the one who shows up in the documentary, basically. Yeah.
The one non-wrestler in the wrestling family.
The one non-wrestler in the wrestling family. Like, that kind of fish out of water scenario, I think, is just kind of funny. And it would be really, really funny to see kind of an extended version of the first act of this movie where this family is, like, so wild and so into wrestling, but she's so disconnected from it. I just think it would be really fun. And obviously a completely different narrative to what the other movie would be. But hey, this is Do It Differently, so I get to do it differently and do what I want. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
And I also feel like that type of story would lean more into Stephen Merchant's, the sensibilities that he's known for in his writing.
His wheelhouse,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think that'd be a really funny idea. Yep.
I like it.
Cool. Yeah. What about you?
Mine is a bit more in-depth.
Sure. I
'cause
assumed. That's why I was going to go first.
Mine is kind of a bit more nitpicky kind of thing, and this is the wrestling nerd in me sort of coming out a little bit.
Sure.
So my Do It Differently is basically the first act, keep it the same. Mm-hmm. Second act is where we start sort of trimming things, start cutting it. My main focus is sort of going to be on changing it from one, no longer going straight into NXT and then jumping to the training, the NXT Performance Center training, and then jumping straight onto main roster. It is instead actually focusing on her time in NXT, the developmental brand, and basically leading up to her becoming the first NXT Women's Champion. And to do that, you can sort of keep a lot of things very similar. Have the whole thing have those showcases be actual just the televised matches kind of thing, and like what was actually happening. When it comes to the three characters that she sort of trains along with and does the tag team match with, like Jerry Lynn and the two others. I only remember Jerry Lynn because Jerry Lynn was the name of an actual wrestler.
Oh, sure.
But this was like apparently a rib from The Rock.
Oh, okay.
To her.
Interesting. Yeah, sure.
But yes, so I would actually pull two of them back a bit, have them still there, but more in the background, and foreground one of them, specifically when Paige returns, and sort of starts finding out more about the other people. Have her specifically based on an actual real-life wrestler known as Tennille Dashwood, who in WWE went by the ring name Emma. Emma was basically around at the same time. The two became friends, mainly because they were also they were both fish out of water, but for two different reasons. So Paige was coming from Norwich, England. Tennille Dashwood came from Melbourne, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, really?
Melbourne, Sydney.
Yeah, right.
In
okay.
Australia.
Yep.
So it was both of them, and it kind of fits in because Emma was sort of the blonde, happy, pretty kind of character that sort of fits, but also has like a huge wrestling lineage in herself as well. She doesn't have the family, but it was just her building her time up across multiple independent scenes in Australia and then going to America and competing in Shimmer, which is one of the big sort of female-only wrestling independent scenes, in which I'm pretty sure they both Paige and Emma before becoming WWE superstars both wrestled in Shimmer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So you can sort of maybe have a little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they became friends, and so I'd have their friendship sort of be the part of the other driving force, and the idea of being able to trust someone in the ring like their family kind of thing, because that sort of gets touched on a bit with the dealing out receipts, which is an actual thing in the independent scene in wrestling, and all that kind of stuff about having to trust your opponent, because it's very much a dance and a ballet. And I think that you can sort of keep, while it was like foregrounded in the beginning, it sort of lost its way at the end, especially by the end where it all seemed almost like her fight with AJ Lee almost seemed completely just that classic rah-rah sports hero. It almost seemed like it was trying to pass it off as real life. Like all that being spontaneous when none of it was the case, especially shown in the movie itself.
Yeah.
That was not the case.
Not fake, but scripted. Yeah.
Yes. So I would have that. And then you can lead up to, because in real life, there was a tournament for the NXT Women's Championship where they sort of all fight, again, predetermined. But the final two were Paige and Emma.
Oh.
And so they fought, and Paige eventually won and became the first NXT Women's Championship. And so I think that would be a better climax than the fight with AJ Lee, because it's still the big championship moment winning, but it was doing it in the ring with a friend, and someone they had to, and it was like a proper 20-minute slobber knocker of a match. So it's someone you had to trust. They had all the big spots that were shown in the thing. She wins with the Page Turner, which was the Zack Attack that he called it.
Oh, yeah.
That same move.
Yep.
So that still fits in there nicely. And that's when she also actually gave a big heartfelt speech.
Oh, okay, right.
So,
interesting. That was it almost seems like more appropriate for the type of narrative that the movie wanted to tell.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
is why I'm
sure.
surprised they jumped straight for the, and it feels more like put the work in, because it was 3 years. It was 1 year in FCW and then 2 years in NXT.
Okay.
And so it'd also be more accurate, I guess. And also then the audience won't actually know who she is as well.
Yeah.
Like they'll know by the end of the climax, sort of, but that sort of tournament start lead up, you'll actually have people going, yeah, don't really know who this is. And as any WWE wrestling fan will know, the Full Sail crowd, which is where they film a lot of their NXT shows, are very much vocal and willing to put themselves over rather than the wrestlers.
What do you mean willing to put themselves?
As in, they themselves become a character in the whole
Oh.
scene. They're the ones making all the chants. They are very into themselves,
Right.
kind of
Okay.
thing.
The crowd itself was a character in that
Yes.
respect. Yeah. Sure.
And they are in it for themselves.
Sure.
And so if they don't like someone, they will make it known.
I have heard that actually, that people will just be egregiously booed, even if they are trying to, a narrative is certainly being pushed. If the crowd does not like it, then they will make it known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very prevalent when it comes to Full Sail,
Sure.
which is and so I feel that also can build itself in. So yeah, that's basically the third act. Then becomes that tournament.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's kind of nice in that it is more true to life, but still is very much similar to the way that it plays out in the movie, basically. Yeah, cool. No, good stuff. All right. Well, with that out of the way, shall we move into random talk?
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
What was with the long?
I don't know. Just made it a question. Why not? What have you got to recommend us this episode?
Okay, so first and foremost,
This is going to be wrestling related, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Okay.
and
Prepare yourself.
So I've probably already mentioned this many times, but seriously, get on Glow.
Oh,
Netflix
the Netflix
TV
show.
series.
Yeah, sure. I have heard very good things about it.
Yes, it is very good, and it's similar in this style in that it's just taking a backstage look at the wrestling promotion as it is. It's focused on the women because it's an all women's thing, and on top of that, go back to the original documentary about Glow, because Glow was originally a proper show.
Sure.
And then there was a documentary made about it, which became quite big. And then the show sort of took on from there and made a fictionalized version of this Glow. So yes, get on all three of those.
Yeah, sure. I've seen the first episode of Glow. I really liked it, and then I just never got around to watching the rest of them. So, yeah, maybe one day. It's in my list like everything else is.
And also, just on that, a second recommendation that I definitely haven't talked about. Also
Wait,
wrestling
2
related.
recommendations?
Yes, because I didn't know if I'd talked about Glow or not yet.
Whoa, all right. I'll allow it this one time.
But it's also wrestling related.
Sure.
And it is, if you can, give some of the old games a go.
The WWE games.
The old WWE games.
Sure. From what I hear, they're infinitely better than the new ones.
Oh yeah, don't touch the new ones, but go back and find, if you happen to have some of the old, like PlayStation 2 kind of thing, the Nintendo 64, if you have any of those and you can get access to them, give them a go, because they are a lot of arcadey fun. And also nothing like wrestling.
Great. Which is part of the fun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, in comparison, my recommendation is, big surprise, complete pivot from wrestling. I was just going to recommend another film that Florence Pugh stars in, obviously related. If you really enjoyed her in this, like, I think she feels like one of those actresses that in, a couple of years, people are going to be talking about her the same way that people talked about Jennifer Lawrence in the early 2010s, basically, like that kind of level of stardom. And I think she's well deserved it, because I think she's fantastic. The movie I'd be recommending in this case is Midsommar, which
Jeez.
Look, is very, very different from Fighting With My Family, in that it is a weird art house horror movie from the director of Hereditary. Came out in early 2019. Evan is giving me a lot of looks right now. I know you will never watch this movie.
No.
Big surprise.
And I know anyone who came in to watch Fighting With the Family is probably going to avoid it unless they really are keen on art house horror.
Yeah.
It is not a family film.
No, this is far from a family film. This is... I don't really want to spoil it, but generally speaking, after a horrifyingly tragic event in... Florence Pugh plays the main character, basically. She and a group of friends travel to this Midsommar festival in Scandinavia, at which point a lot of very strange, bizarre, and deeply, deeply unpleasant things begin to happen. It is weird, it is very esoteric, it is quite abstract about what it is about, and I kind of love it. So it is a very, very specific acquired taste. But hey, if you want to see, like, this was kind of Florence Pugh's first big breakout role, from what I can tell. Like, she's amazing in this film and very much the centerpiece in some respects. And then, like, it was obviously followed by a bunch of other films along the lines of, like, Little Women later that year as well. Obviously, we're going to have Black Widow soon too, as well as a bunch of other films. And I think this is a really, really, a huge hallmark of her talents, as well as director Ari Aster, as well as just being a really quite incredible and compelling horror film, which almost certainly a lot of people will probably hate if you ever watch. But hey, this is the type of movies that I like. So what do you want? We should do Midsommar.
Oh.
And then we can base it on, like, because it's a real ritual. It's an actual real thing. It's never going to happen, because I can almost assure that you will outright refuse to watch it.
Look, if there's enough requests for it...
Yes!
And by that, I mean from our non-existent audience, not from you.
Damn it.
Then yes, I will consider doing... Hell, I will film myself going to a Midsummer type festival. For research purposes.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Send in your aggressive recommendations of the fact that we should do Midsommar so that I can encourage Eva to watch it.
And then I can take those, give them a nice polish, stick them sideways, and shove them up your candy ass.
Yes, very good. Very good. In next episode, we are going to be doing a film that we've actually been meaning to do for a little while now. in that it is a weird mix of interesting genres that is going to be real fun to talk about, I think.
We're looking at Anna and the Apocalypse.
Whoa.
How fitting.
How fitting. Yeah, well, depending on when this episode comes out. Who knows? The world might be a desolate wasteland by the time this starts. We schedule them so far ahead in advance. Yeah, so that is going to be a horror comedy musical, I guess is the best way to describe it. Fairly fun movie, based on a short film. I'm going to be talking about that next episode. Until then, fare thee well.
If you smell what the rock is watching.